Lil Uzi Vert announced Eternal Atake, his second studio album, in July of 2018, and it was supposedly finished that December, but time passed, songs leaked, and no album came out. It wasn't until the start of 2020 that singles like Futsal Shuffle and My Way seemed to signal that something was close. When the album finally dropped in March of 2020, it did the impossible and lived up to 2 years of expectations. Eternal Atake has a futuristic and spacey theme. You can see it on the album art, which shows some beings on the moon looking at their spaceship over Earth. This cover was chosen after the original was too close to the logo of Heaven's Gate, which Wikipedia calls a UFO religious cult. This crazy look carries into the sound of the album too. Just listen to the opening song, Baby Pluto.
I turned to an addict, I brought me a paddock, I brought her a baby one. Yeah, I brought me a Maybach, it came with 2 doors, yeah, that's a Mercedes one.
I'll admit, it's not the most futuristic sounds you can find in music right now, but it's pretty spacey compared to recent trap releases. So how does this animated sound come through on the production of songs like Baby Pluto, Silly Watch, and Futsal Shuffle? What makes Lil Uzi Vert's Eternal Atake sound so futuristic? A lot of the melodies on Eternal Atake are built around rhythmic synth chords. The notes of these chords set the tone of the song, and the rhythm creates the energy. There are also a bunch of effects layered on these chords to help them sound more futuristic, like on Baby Pluto.
I turned to an addict, I brought me a paddock, I brought her a baby one. Yeah, I brought me a Maybach, it came with 2 doors, yeah, that's a Mercedes one.
This instrumental is built around a synth that plays a chord every beat.
I turned to an addict, I brought me a paddock, I brought her a baby one. Yeah, I brought me a...
This part of the song only has 2 chords, A sharp minor and G sharp. The lack of chords is balanced by a sound that is constantly changing. The synth playing here seems to be based on a saw wave, but that alone isn't very interesting. We need to add some effects, ones that create a lot of motion. We can start with the chorus, where the sound is layered with a bunch of slightly detuned copies. It sounds like a bunch of different synths are playing at the same time, but slightly different. And we can add some more effects on top of this, like phasing, where the sound is mixed with a single delayed duplicate. All of the repetition from these different effects makes for a bunch of moving interference patterns. Basically, different frequencies change volumes at different times, creating a rhythm within the instrument. This leads to a set of chords where each hit is a little different. With a foundation of chords laid down, these songs can go crazy on the leads. It could be a bell or a synth, like this memorable line on Futsal Shuffle. There's a jittery synth playing a lead melody that seems to go on forever. Ignoring the effects, this sound doesn't seem to be anything crazy, just a normal saw wave. If we play the same melody with just this sound, it's pretty normal. It definitely lacks the energy of that original lead, which seems to come from the switching between loud and quiet. This volume change could be done a number of ways. One of the easier options is to use a volume gate, where you set a pattern when the volume will be on or off, and the gate loops through this pattern while the song plays. We can set up a volume gate that has the same pattern as Futsal Shuffle. Just using this gate though leaves some dead space where no sound is let through, and we can fill these gaps with a little bit of delay that quietly repeats the sound. Having melodies with leads and chords both made from synths gives them a cohesive futuristic sound. There are also a bunch of effects here that add complexity and motion, things like a chorus or phaser on the chords, or a volume gate on the lead. This makes for chords that bring both tone and rhythm, and high energy leads that dart all over the place. The drums on Eternal Atake aren't as futuristic as the melodies. They're typically just high energy trap samples, but they do continue the intensity, like on Silly Watch.
I came in with a new 40 Glock. Fuck on your bitch, make that hoe wanna milli rock. I'm with my boys and no, we do not milli rock.
There's a hi-hat, snare, and some extra perk that sounds like it could be a bongo. Notice the lack of kick. That roll is instead filled by the 808.
I came in with a new 40 Glock. Fuck on your bitch.
The hi-hats hit every eighth note, the snare hits on beats 3 in the end of 1, and that bongo plays 3 notes at the end of every few measures. These drums aren't anything crazy, they don't push the sound of the songs into the future, but since they are contemporary trap samples, they also don't drag the song into the past either. Under the drums are the basses on Eternal Atake, and they're similar to the drums. Typical short trap 808s that add a bounce and serve as the kick, but don't do anything too crazy. You can hear a good example again on Futsal Shuffle. The short 808 sample here plays 4 notes in a repeating pattern. The first note is on the downbeat, and then each of the following notes is 3 half beats later, which means that only the third note is also on a beat. This song is built around melodies, not chords. We already looked at that distinct lead. This means there's nothing for the 808 to really follow. It just has to stay in the key of D minor. It makes sense then that the 808 starts on D, which sounds like the root note, and then goes down to C, the only other note it plays. This 808 on Futsal Shuffle, like many songs on this album, adds some bounce by playing on the on and off beats, not doing anything crazy with the notes. That's a look at some of the most futuristic songs on Eternal Atake, and let's see if we can use the ideas in these songs to make a beat that captures the futuristic and spacey sound of this album. To recap, the melodies were built on a synth playing a small number of rhythmic chords, 2 on Baby Pluto. This low number of chords was balanced with all of the motion that came from the effects, like a chorus or phaser. On top of the melodies was a high energy lead, like the synth on Futsal Shuffle. It played a long melody, and the effects, like a noise gate, created an intense rhythm. The drums on Eternal Atake are usually standard trap samples, like a hi-hat, snare, and kick. Maybe an extra sound here or there, like that bongo on Silly Watch. Underneath the drums were short 808s that filled in the missing kick and followed the chords. We can start a new instrumental by laying down a foundation of chords. There doesn't need to be that many different chords, but they should be played by a synth at regular intervals. I only played 2 different chords here, B minor and A major. And they follow a simple rhythm playing on every beat. The A chord is played 2 different ways though. The first time it goes below the B minor chord, and the second time it goes up. And I think it makes the loop a little more interesting. The instrument that plays these chords is a synth using a square wave. I filtered out some of the low and high frequencies to make room for everything else that's going to come in for the beat. With no other effects, it doesn't sound that bad, but does get a little repetitive. I added some chorus and flanging until there was enough motion, or until the sound was different enough between stabs. These synth chords set the rhythm and tone of our melody, and let's keep the synths going by throwing on a lead. This melody doesn't follow the chords that closely, just playing a bunch of different notes. So far, this beat sounds like it's in the key of D major or B minor, so those are the 2 notes we want to hear, D or B. This melody instead dances around these pitches, playing mostly nearby ones like C sharp or A, and I think this makes it feel like it never quite reaches an end, it just keeps going and going. This melody is also a little more repetitive than Futsal Shuffle. The first and third measures are the same, and it helps it to feel a little more cohesive. The sound starts as a normal saw wave. All of the energy comes from that noise gate that makes it duck in and out. The pattern I use on this noise gate isn't anything technical, just one that sounded good. And there's a touch of delay after the noise gate too, to fill in those gaps. This lead blends with those synth chords to make a relatively simple melody for our instrumental that still has a ton of energy. Next, let's add some drums. They're just going to be trap samples that add a little bounce. There's a hi-hat, a snare, and this weird shaker. The hi-hat is on every eighth note with a double up every few measures, the snare is on beat 3, and the shaker is on the and of 1. Mostly typical trap percussion with the addition of that weird shaker sound to mix it up. And we can finish the drums by adding a short 808 bass that also fills in the lack of kick in the drums. This 808 follows the chord, only playing 2 notes. It starts on D, which seems to be the key of the song and sounds like the root. D is also in the B minor chord. The 808 then moves up to E, which happens to be in the A major chord. The first 808 plays on the downbeat, and the second plays a beat and a half later. This same pattern is followed by the second pair of 808s. They're just raised 3 half steps. This 808 doesn't play too often and makes the rhythm of the song slightly more interesting. That's the finished beat, made from the ideas in some of the more futuristic songs on Lil Uzi Vert's Eternal Atake. The synth instruments have a spacey sound with a variety of effects to add motion and energy. Hopefully this gets you to listen to the instrumentals in other songs and shuffles your beliefs on what makes Eternal Atake so futuristic. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment and let me know what you think of Lil Uzi Vert's Eternal Atake. Don't forget to subscribe to Sound Selection on YouTube and follow on Instagram.